So I'm joined by Ryan Juckett of Hypersect, and we're going to be doing a post-mortem discussion on INVERSUS. If you aren't aware of what INVERSUS is, or just hearing about this game, we did an interview with Ryan back right before the first initial launch of INVERSUS in August of 2016, which there'll be a little link somewhere on the screen to that interview. Um, Ryan, thank you for coming back and talking to us a little bit more now that it's been a couple years.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Um, so yeah, like I was saying, August of 2016 you launched, and then there was a series of patches that you put out, culminating more recently with kind of patch 1.5 slash INVERSUS Deluxe, which is kind of a major expansion that brought you onto the Xbox and the Switch,
Yeah,
which has kind of been a very big move. Um, I'd kind of like to open up. I would hope to talk about that process, that iterative process of all these different patches and the launch process, and kind of how that worked and what your statistics of launch were on the different platforms and that kind of experience.
sure. I mean, so, initially, right, it was Steam and PS4, and that was for about, like, came out in August 20, whatever last year was,
Mm-hmm.
16. And around PAX East, I guess that's spring, the following
Mm-hmm.
spring, I announced, oh, we're going to do Xbox. And I'd been planning on doing Xbox. I'd wanted to do it at launch, but stuff didn't work out. So, anyways, at that point, I decided to do Xbox and Switch. Was announced. At that point, like the console,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to get on it. I didn't have kits or anything. I didn't know if I'd be able to. And it was at PAX East, I believe, where it sort of consolidated the talking with Nintendo and getting over the hump of like, oh yeah, let's make this happen. This deluxe edition, which I was demoing at PAX East,
Mm-hmm.
um, looks like it's not just, now things are getting more just direct ported over to Switch, but at the
Mm-hmm.
time, I wanted newer stuff. So that looked promising. And so that was in the spring, and I guess it was only, it came out end of September. So it was a pretty quick cycle from like getting dev kits to fully
Yeah.
porting it and getting it out. And then Switch and Xbox came out at a pretty similar time at around end of September, start of October this year. So it was not like 2 months ago,
Mm.
almost a little
Yeah.
over. Um, and you're a little like it was interesting because the game, which it's called InVersus Deluxe now.
Mm.
So it's kind of got a new name, and there was a thought there of like it has to. I want to like present it as like, oh, it's this new thing. It's still got the whole old game in it. It's not really a
Mm.
sequel, and maybe this would let it because it's like any criticisms, like big criticisms people had of the initial release, are primarily fixed.
Mm.
And fixed, I don't mean like fixed isn't the right word, but like, there's now AI bots and stuff like that where it's like you can play versus mode solo and do all these things that you couldn't do before. And I was like, oh, well, now it's got this new thing. Maybe, people will review it again and then it'll, review even better this time because it's like the
Mm.
old thing plus more. Um, it didn't quite break over that line of like in the broad press saying, oh, this is a new enough game to really like re-review. Like
Mm.
people would mention it again. But a lot of the like media coverage came out on Nintendo enthusiast sites, which are, they're pretty excited about stuff coming out on Switch still because it's
Yeah.
early. Where the Xbox side didn't garner as much press because it was kind of like, it's even though it's not just a port from the PS4 version because it's this newer thing. Um, and the PS4 did end up getting updated like a month later to match, but it just wasn't as newsworthy of an item there. So I think because of that, it was much more notable on Switch, and that's where a lot of the press came in. It did a lot better on Switch than it
Mm.
did on Xbox.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Let's drill down into that. So, comparing the different platforms, how has Inversus performed over time? Kind of what is you and how is that experience of launching on Steam versus Nintendo versus PS4 versus Xbox? How has that been?
Yeah, I mean, so when I did the initial launch on Steam and PS4, that was my first time publishing a game, right?
Mm,
Like I've worked in games forever and made games, but when it comes to like marketing or whatever you want to call it,
yeah.
I just kind of winging it. And so it's hard to, like the when I came to do the deluxe edition, I had a lot more experience on that end.
Sure.
So I knew I was able to at least, I don't know that I did better at the good parts, but I think I definitely spent less wasted time of like learning like, okay, that might not be worth doing, or this, of trimming some of that
Sure.
away. And it's hard to say too, like, is it, because when the game came out, it did okay. It wasn't like some Undertale or anything, right? When it
Right.
came out on Steam and PS4, and it did better on console than it did on Steam. Um, and like it's hard to talk about like, oh, was it, like, are things successful or failures or whatever, just because everything's so relative from
Yeah. Yeah.
developer to developer. Um, where like for some people, Inversus would be like, oh, it did not, make enough money or whatever. But I'm a one person team.
Mm,
Um, but then for some people too, like even they might be like, oh, it made like a ton of money because, of wherever I live or this and that, where I live in like this Seattle area where like Microsoft is and everyone, and, you know, expenses here are higher than some
mm,
parts of the country. So it's like, it's weird to classify whether it wasn't, it didn't do so well that it's like, oh, obviously it's millions of dollars. It's like a
right.
breakout success, but it didn't do so bad that it's like obviously like a failure. And it's in that middle ground where it's like, oh, depending on your frame of reference, it
Mm,
probably did okay or really well, or whatever. Um, and but PS4 performed better. That is like some people will say like, oh, that's probably because it's a multiplayer game, console friendly, controller based. But I would argue it's more just because of the frequency of competition coming out,
mm,
and I also got better placement on the storefront when I initially launched on PS4 than I did on Steam.
sure.
Um, and it's like I think it's more. I don't know. Like there's so many players on Steam and there are successful like local multiplayer. I mean, this has online too, but that
Right.
like
Right. Right.
shared screen multiplayer type experiences. And it could just be like the game has a bit of an artsy look. Maybe players looking for that or more on PS4. Who, like you can't tell, right?
Yeah,
But
and just the
it,
volume of games coming out on Steam
I
is
assume that has a large influence, but I can't prove that, right?
right.
The And then when it came time to do Xbox and Switch, I think there is like Xbox has not it's the least populated console right now or system. And Switch is on a trajectory to become the most. So like Steam's been out for a year, Switch just bypassed in like numbers of copies out there.
Hmm.
And that is like ignoring the fact that Steam has gone on larger discounts because it's done a winter sale, it's done a summer sale. There's also been more free copies distributed on Steam, I believe,
Hmm.
than there were on Switch, just for like press outreach
The
and
initial
this and that.
outreach and all that. Yeah.
Um, and so like Switch is, I don't have haven't looked at the numbers, but like from a monetary standpoint, has pulled in more money just because it hasn't gone on sale and it's already
Right.
bypassed the numbers or the like copies,
Hmm.
and it looks like it's on a trajectory to outpass PS4 too, which has also been
Wow.
out for a year.
Right.
Um, so that's good. And I think, and you look at Switch and it's like, well, there's a lot of games coming out now, but
Mm,
there's relatively compared to the library on PS4 or compared to the library on Steam or Xbox, it's very small, right?
right.
So the game stands out more. And I think, that's the thing. It's like it's a quality game. It's a kind of a niche market, so it's the more it gets visibility from people, it's just going to perform better, right?
Sure.
Because it's not, it's interesting, and it's like, oh, if I've only got so many things to pick from, let's grab this thing that looks interesting and fun and try it
Right.
out. the but yeah, like as far as launching on everything goes, plus from like getting it out on all the platforms. Once again, I am in a weird position there because I've worked in games for a long time. It's not like from the technical side, there weren't many big surprises. You know, some stuff's annoying, some stuff's trivial, right? But it's nothing was like, oh my God, this is crazy. And then from the, actual like putting assets out and it's pretty compared to what it was years ago on older platforms. They've worked out a lot of the kinks, and it's kind of you go on the internet, fill out some forms, and you upload your artwork, and it's good to go. So that was all. I don't know. There wasn't too much unexpected or really to learn from that process, other than learning that learned this last year. Is it takes a lot of time.
Sure.
I never understood how much time was involved and how many art assets were involved in putting something on a storefront, and translations, and and I don't even think I do that as well as I could with like, oh, does Russia have a perfectly beautiful store? It's getting better, but
well, let's drill down into some of that, not just from the perspective of launch and kind of sale, but from the entire development process. What I really want to do with these postmortems is kind of learn what were the things that worked really well for you in designing the game, and what were some of the things that didn't work well. And so starting with some of the things that went well for you, what I'd hoped you'd talk about is one of the most remarkable things, I think, from watching INVERSUS over these past years, which is your post-launch support. I think almost bar none of any of the other indie games we've covered on IndieHangover, your support for the game after launch has really been spectacular, and you've added a ton to the game with each of those different patches that came out, a couple weeks after launch, a couple months after launch, a year after. So I think that's pretty safe to say that went very well. But how did you approach that, and did it go as well from your side as it did from kind of a consumer or somebody looking in?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a perfect world, all those changes would have been there on launch, right? Because a lot of it was learning and reacting to stuff that I hadn't done before. Most of the post-launch support has been related to online multiplayer stuff. And sort of, I've never done the, traditionally I've been involved in like, systems design, as far as like game designy type stuff goes, like, like mechanics and more not the actual framework that you would put an online multiplayer game into.
Sure.
And not having a solid understanding of like the best way to do matchmaking, especially in a smaller title with a very small player base, and sort of getting it. And also you don't know how big is the player base going to be when you launch, right? Like maybe if the game had like, a million players, the initial setup for how online worked wouldn't have been too bad. Certainly could have been improved on. But a lot of it's been like, okay, how do I make the game run more streamlined to help it so people have a chance with a small player pool of getting in online public matches and not like sitting in a lobby waiting forever. So that was like, you can play the whole single player game while you're in the lobby. So it's background matchmaking, and we'll just pause your game and resume it, making it so when you are in public games, like a lot of it's like, oh, this is why Street Fighter does whatever, right? Like not knowing, like, this is why after 2 matches, you're forced to go back in the matchmaking pool, because that way 2 people don't just sit there playing forever and there's someone else sitting on the side waiting for a game, right? Like forcing people to pipe back in and rematch sort of keeps mixing it up and gets you new opponents and helps when there's a smaller number. So it's a lot of things like that have been added in. And then just some stuff for more things to unlock for like retention. So like, as you're playing this stuff. Yeah, like stuff to keep you wanting to play like those games more often, to get the stuff, which is like, I'm very careful with not doing too much of a, I mean, I don't know, maybe I could be more careful, but like not making these you're doing work to get these rewards.
Right.
Like they're not like, I don't know. There's like a thing with achievements, right? When you get into intrinsic and extrinsic like reward paths and how they make the actual fun part of the game feel. And like, there's a weird balance of wanting to respect your time and all the things you unlock are kind of just goofy cosmetic things. Like here's colors, here's this
emotes and colors and different schemes,
like getting
and that kind of thing.
The actual gameplay elements, like the levels, is pretty straightforward. It's like play the previous level and it goes through. But the stuff that's sort of random unlocks is whatever, and that's just stuff to like. It sort of just keeps you a little bit engaged of like, oh, I've almost leveled up again. Let's play some more, and just trying to keep the online player base going. Where if it was more single player focused, I probably would design some of that a little different. Where those things were more put in there a little bit just to help keep engagement there, because if you're playing at a time, it adds more value to the other people playing, and there's a bit of a cycle there, right? Where the more people online, the more value it adds for everyone, because there's people to play with.
More people.
And because that stuff came in late on Steam and PS4, it's hard to gauge like how effective any of it was, right? Because like the initial launch population, if you look at like the graphs of like players online, day one, it's really big, and then like it starts, it decays down, right? It goes up during a sale because people buy it, but you're trying to make it so after people buy it, they like come back to it more often, right?
Sure.
And that's what a lot of these changes are for. It seems like it has helped a bit. It's hard to, really break apart what piece did what. It's certainly on Switch much easier to find an online match than it is in public games on any of the other platforms, even though PS4 has more copies out there. It might still be twice as many or something. But just because it's newer, but also people hopping into it have a better experience that sort of encourages playing more, and also encourages like, oh, I can just background matchmake. And that's now like intrinsic to my understanding of how the game works, where people that got PS4 on launch, there's probably a lot of people that haven't loaded it back up since that update happened, right?
That's probably true.
So they don't even know like that's a thing, which is, I can do a better job maybe of like communicating that somehow. But
what were some of the other things that from a design perspective of initially putting the game together, you felt worked really well?
What are things from a design perspective on the initial putting the game together?
Yeah, just either from the initial or from any one of these patches. What's something kind of that surprised you that it kind of just worked perfectly?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what surprised me that worked perfectly, but something that definitely surprised me was how popular arcade mode was.
Oh, okay.
Initially, arcade was put like, the name of the game is INVERSUS. It has the word versus in it.
Yeah, right.
It's a game about this like 1v1, like sort of fast-paced chess, right? Where there's a lot of strategy, and it's very much designed around that. And because initially I didn't have AI in the game, and it was like, okay, here's what you could do. You got this local multiplayer only game. And it was like, well, you could add AI, so you could play against AI. You could add online. You do the stuff in it. The game is actually fairly complicated because there's a lot. Your choices matter a lot, right? Like your ammo controls controls attacking, but it also controls where you can move. It controls if you're getting blocked in. Most games don't have that much complexity layered on a single mechanic, so it's a lot easier to write AI for, say, Call of Duty or any shooter where like your guns are just for shooting, right? Like movement's a separate problem. It's not they're not like tightly intertwined of like, if I'm going to attack him, do I have enough bullets to even get there, or what am I going to do? And I was like, this seems really hard to do well, so I don't want to do that. And a lot of people had told me, well, you got to do online or people are just going to complain forever about you don't have online. So I was like, well, let's do online, but then you still can't play single player. So what could I do that's simple? I was like, well, I could just make a little arcade thing, because I can just program some kind of really super simple procedural spawn behaviors. So I don't really have to like design it much. I can just like do it with numbers, and I can make the AI dumb because that's what you want. You want like, here's AI that just moves towards you. Here's AI that's, you know, 'cause there's just like patterns, and there's just going to be like 50 of them or something. And I like Geometry Wars, and I was like, okay, well, let's just get some stuff like that, and then maybe it'll be kind of unique. So I put that together, and that was, you know, it had all the groundwork from the competitive mode, all the polish, all the mechanics. It doesn't utilize all the mechanics quite as well because you're not trapping people as much. You're more avoiding getting trapped. There's a bit less of a like bi-directional thing there because the enemy, most of the enemies in arcade mode have the power where it lets them just smash through the blocks, right? You're not really closing them in. Some of them you are, but not normally. So it's a different dynamic, and you're also you're getting a lot more bullets based on how I tuned it.
Yeah.
So you're shooting a lot faster. So it plays a little different, but it has a lot of this baseline to build off. So it's kind of one of those things where you're like, well, if I've made a game where, you know, like you look at like a lot of GTA games, moving through the world is like the funnest thing in GTA, right? Like running or driving, or, you know, 'cause there's this simulation, you're playing with it, you're getting it. And then you can kind of, GTA has some missions that are good, but a lot of GTA missions traditionally, especially before 5, in my opinion, are very like, ugh. But because you're doing them in this, because moving itself is fun and you're moving through the whole mission, it kind of like projects fun onto it, right? It's got Spider-Man 2 was the same way with swinging through the city. Like the actual arc of the game, or like the mission design wasn't amazing, but being Spider-Man was so good that it kind of makes the rest of it better for it. And so it had a bit of that. But I didn't think it was like, okay, here's gonna be a fun thing to play, and, you know, it'd be cool if people like it. But I didn't expect it to be that it's either half or more than half of like what people like in the game. Like it's pretty even break with competitive and arcade. From just kind of, I don't know, it's hard to break that down. A bit of it's anecdotal from just like player base communication, and some of it is like looking at playtimes and stuff. But because you have more access to it, you can play it more. So I don't know, but it regardless, I did not expect it to be like a thing where people were super into it and like getting, you know, there's a lot of competition there between people, and it is unique. It's like got stuff that, you know, it's like Geometry Wars with ammo management and strategy, right? So it's a different thing. So that's been, I don't know, that was surprising to find out. And I guess another interesting thing is after that, you know, in Deluxe, I added bots and AI, because I was like, well, we're going to go in and do it. That actually worked out a lot better. I mean, at that point, I understood the game way better. So of course I could program the AI a lot quicker than when it was in development. And like I hadn't spent a year playing it with real people and all this stuff, and understanding the systems of being able to really think about, you understand the game, but you don't until like the whole world's playing it and coming up with strategies. Like you don't, you know, you learn more constantly. So I think that sped up the process of writing the AI, but the AI came out, you know, it could be better, it could always be better, but it's like people have started Reddit threads about how good the AI is and stuff. And that's like, that has been very satisfying to see, because it is a complicated, it solves a lot of complicated problems, despite how simple the game looks. And that has been very positive from a lot of people. And it's been fun seeing the best players in the world take on the highest level AI, you know, and that's where you can start to see some of the AI, like the flaws in it that I didn't quite get, but it's super hard. And seeing people actually consistently defeat it, you know, there's only a couple people out there probably that can do it, because the hardest level gets insane. But it's been amazing to see them be like, okay, I'm going to put it on, you know, max rounds, max difficulty, max this, and then I'm going to like take it out. And it's just constantly parrying shots and like, you know, finding ways to suppress it. And they've, you know, put some YouTube videos up of that, which was great to see. So that was kind of, I was very happy with how that turned out. It was a bit of I was nervous going into it, saying like, will I be able to pull this off to a degree that's I'm happy with?
Seems like you have, and it's nice that you've gotten some recognition from the community on that.
Yeah,
Um,
people enjoy it.
so from the other side, what were some of the things that were hurdles? You kind of mentioned that a lot of the actual putting the game out there wasn't really a hurdle. You've kind of had a pretty easy time, other than the number of assets. But what were some of the things that didn't go quite the way you expected them to?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest was just like the matchmaking, right? Getting that
Mm-hmm.
to hold the population well. And even still, with all my changes, like you'll get, like Switch came out, or yeah, it was when Switch came out. I was playing that opening launch weekend, and it was real easy to find a match. Like you'd hop on, and they would come in quick, and you'd see some people online mention, because people ask like, "Oh, how's online?" Right,
Mm-hmm.
and Reddit or wherever, and some people might reply and be like, "I went on twice. I waited at least a minute both times and didn't find a match, so I think it's dead." And you go like, "Well, just like running the math, like that's and like it's not on them to understand this, but like, well, I wait longer than that in like Street Fighter Five
Right.
a lot, and that is way more players than I would ever have, like way like it's another level, and but like if you look at like a game, you play 2 rounds, and maybe you make this shorter still, but you play two best of fives
Mm-hmm.
with someone, or you potentially play three. Basically, play best of five per game, then you play whoever first wins 2 out of 3 games, then you rematch with someone. But that might take 5-6 minutes there.
Right.
So you need a certain number of people to be there for like you to be able to hop on. If someone's not already in waiting and you find them, like the number of people that it's you probably need, I don't know, to guarantee under a minute, it could be like you need 20 people playing, or like I don't know what the number is, right? But
Right.
it's a certain number to have that many matches to guarantee one of them is going to bail out at the right time to hop you in. And then of your like minute search, probably the first 10 seconds of that is just spinning up the back end matchmaking servers and
Just
like all this
getting
stuff.
connected and all that. Yeah.
But when you're coming from games like Mario Kart or whatever, PUBG, or something with like a billion people, there's better, you're going to get in quick. And I think there's ways, if I was to do it again, ignoring the like, do I do cross-platform or whatever, just like even as is, I think what you want to do, and ARMS, from what I can tell, does this actually, which was really interesting, is you want to say, okay, I've got 1v1 games or 2v2 games. Instead of making the lobby 1-and-1, make a lobby for like 8 people. Start filling it in, so that way when you hop in there, you can see game is currently going, you're next in the round robin queue or whatever. So you will pretty much instantly get into a game. And once that thing starts to fill up, like you're at 7 of 8 slots or something, take 3 of those people, have them split off and start a new lobby. So then it opens up space again. And were I to do it again, that's how I would set it up, because right now it doesn't do a good enough job communicating like you're in queue and there is something pending, right? Like you will get into a game. It's just this one's going a little long or whatever. Because especially with a title as small as INVERSUS, where after it's out for a while, and this happens to a lot of, smaller multiplayer games, is like people are like, oh, it's dead online. And even if it gets to being like 2 people playing a match and then a third comes in, it still might feel dead, because how long do you wait? Because you don't know, is there a match going on and you're going to pop in. So I think it could do better in that space. And it's just like a lot of stuff with that, where it's like, I'd never made an online thing. And then also the number of people that have successfully made multiplayer games that are really small, like indie niche things, like exploring the best ways to do that isn't, I don't know, it's just not something like normally when you think of multiplayer games, you're talking about Halo and stuff, where it's like, oh, this is how they set it up. But they have to deal with all those problems too, because they're also more concerned with like, making sure the ping is high enough or low enough, and therefore, your pool gets smaller and smaller, and there's like 5 billion problems you can solve. But the idea of like, there's an interesting thought process of how do you make a great online experience if the simultaneous player base online is under 5 or whatever. Like, what's the best way to do that, right? That's a different. So I think that could be done a lot better, which would help, with the long-term legs of a smaller game where after the launch window is faded off and it's been out for a year.
Sure.
And
that's some really good insight, though, in kind of referencing the other ways to do that. I mean, even talking with other people that have done online games, I mean, it's a consistent issue in the indie scene where your user base, your player base is not going to be massive like these other games. That's always.
I mean, it could be. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
But you don't know.
Right. It's very much a more of an unknown. So let's touch on kind of like the miscellaneous things, and I'll push you to the first thing I want to know about, which is over the course of INVERSUS being out, having followed you on Twitter and seen what's going on, it's become clear that INVERSUS has kind of become a bit of a takeoff in Japan. And you've got a really big player base in Japan, and it's become kind of like a pub game, and there's tournaments. And my read from your tweets about this has been it was a surprise that this kind of came out of nowhere. You didn't expect that. So how have you interacted with that community, and what was that whole experience of kind of having this pop up in a place you didn't expect it to been like?
Yeah, I mean, once again, everything's relative, right? So like, it did far better in Japan than I would have expected. And especially given, like, talking to other people, my percentages in Japan are much higher as far as like what makes up my sales compared to an average game. But it's not like a household name in Japan or anything, right? No. Like it's still, it's an indie game, right? So initially when I was making the game, because it's this minimalist abstract looking thing, I had even got turned down from a Japanese publisher for getting it out on PS4 in Japan initially. Wow. And they were like, yeah, people over here are not going to like this. It's too, you need cute characters. You need, to really like, and not to say it wouldn't do even better with cute characters. I think it probably would, but just in anywhere, right? Because people react to characters. That goes against my vision for it. But I think you could, if you were to just look at it from I just want to make something that's going to make money, I think adding stuff like that would help. But yeah, so it was like, I was like, okay, so this is not going to do well at all. So I just want to get it out. So I was just like emailing anyone, like, will you help put this out over there? And I ended up working with a publisher over there for PS4. And then, there was also Steam. I was just doing on my own because it was pretty easy once I had the translations and all that. And when it came out, it was like, there was a good number of players playing it over there, which is really cool. And on PS4, they've done, I think the PS4 Japanese version has had the deepest discounts on the game. It was during like a New Year's sale last year. So that got a ton of more players in there. And then on Switch, it's, there's on Xbox, I don't know how many of the players are from Japan. I know there's some, but that's not that big over there. But on Switch, there's I think it's like it's over a quarter of the player base is from Japan. And I think that's similar on PS4. It might be like half or something actually. Wow. But they had that big sale, so I don't know. Where on Switch, Japan hasn't had any sales yet. It's only been sales in America and Europe so far. They were minor sales, like 15%. But point being, Japan, they 25, 30% of your worldwide release game is pretty high for Japan, is my understanding. And then all the best players are also in Japan, which is really cool. I mean, it's cool just to see like it recognized in some other culture that I'm not. Like, I don't speak Japanese. I've never been to Japan. I like Nintendo games. They're all from Japan, but the top arcade players, the top versus players, are all from there. So I will interact with them a bit online because I'll be online a bunch and they will too. And so we'll see each other either in public games or sometimes they'll pop in on the community Discord. But it's hard to uh, they usually don't all know much English, so it's
Sure.
a bit hard to communicate. Although some of them have been learning English in college and stuff and getting better, and then you'll see them more. And like it's like they're so good to the point where people will ask me at PAX like, "Hey, I got the game last night. I went online. I was kind of bummed to see like there were some cheating scores at the top." And I'm like, "No, those are real. They're just real good. You're not there yet." Like, they got 8 million points. Like, yeah, I know you're at like 100, but
Whole
and
different level.
yeah, and so yeah, they've been there's been it's also been interesting too because there's been different groups like communities over there getting into it of like some of the players I've noticed are also really big on like which I guess makes kind of sense, like the Puyo Puyo Tetris scene. Like they're like,
Sure.
oh, we play a lot of competitive puzzle games, and then there's like this one, like you're saying, there's this little like gaming bar. I don't know if it's in Tokyo or nearby or whatever, but they have a group of players there that plays the game a lot. So they have the game set up there. And sometimes I would just see that pop up on Twitter. I was like, oh, cool. And that group is actually right now running their second, like what they call the C4 LAN Cup. There's like the C4 LAN event that happens.
Yeah.
I don't quite know how big or small it is relative to other things that happen in Japan, but there they do a lot of fighting game tournaments and stuff. And then the community runs like a side tournament, but and it was really small last time. It looks like this time they've got a bit more production behind it as far as the cameras they're streaming on are a lot nicer and they have, signs and stuff. And so they're doing a little tournament this weekend. I think the first day was yesterday. It was 1v1s. And so it's cool to see stuff like that.
Yeah.
And sort of there's another group that's been doing weekly streams where they have a lot of the players come on and like compete on the stream in private matches. And then they have someone like talking over it the whole time. And at one point I went on, I had to like get up at 4 a.m. or something to join them. But one of the people that they work with does speak English. So there's a lot of back and forth, communication there through the translator, which was fun because I hadn't really gotten to talk to many. I knew a lot of the community members' names just from the leaderboards,
Sure.
but having them ask questions or being able to, joke around with them was fun. So yeah, that's been really cool to see. Hopefully at some point I go to Japan and get to meet some of them, but until then, it's it's happening over there, and it's kind of luckily the community is sort of helping push some of that along on that side.
Yeah, absolutely. Were there any other things that were just kind of oddball, almost bits of advice you'd mentioned from weird things you ran into either in production or maybe in showing the game at conventions? Any kind of just little tidbits of advice or knowledge that you've gained over this past couple years almost now?
Yeah, I mean, I think I missed as far as when INVERSUS came out.
Mm-hmm.
It was past the like boat of if you make a quality and the quality, I mean like a well crafted title, there will be enough visibility of it that you will get an audience, right?
Yeah.
Of like a giant audience, like you are
Right.
going to be successful, right? And a lot of the advice I had received beforehand was from people who were making games in that period, right?
Right.
Versus was like kind of right after that happened, where it's just like you're set, like this is going to do well. It's small, but it's well made, and you're one person, right? And INVERSUS was like at a point where it's like if you were built as well as it is, it would do okay. And each year, it seems to be dwindling, right? And right now, I was lucky to be able to come out on Switch semi-early in the lifespan,
Right.
because if you were earlier than me, it would have done crazy well because you could get on that bestsellers list, right?
Right.
Where now, if you open up the bestsellers list, it's even worse than I was like right at the end of that tail too. But like right now, if you look at the bestsellers list, you're going to see Mario Odyssey. You're going to see Mario Kart 8. You're going to see Mario vs. Rabbids.
Yeah.
You're going to see Zelda.
Yeah.
You're going to see Minecraft. You're going to see Rocket League. And it's the window now for like a smaller title getting in there is there might be one or two that can get on that list, but right at the start of the system, there might be like 15 of them on that list.
Sure.
And people load that up, and it's like that's just the snowball, right?
Right.
Where now probably the smallest game up there might be Overcooked or something, which is a very, similar shared screen multiplayer game, but it's the hit of last year, right? And you can't really plan on being the hit. I mean, well, depending on what the budget is coming in, like eventually some things you have to plan on being a hit, but if you're working at the scale I am, it's a little hard to plan on that. So now coming out, I think there's like two ways to, like, you either hope it goes viral or something and you ship something that's really cheap and maybe like you get enough people buying in really early, just because it's like a impulse buy, and then it like catches off, and then it is a breakout hit.
Right.
That
gets on the YouTuber circuit, that kind of thing.
I don't love the idea of like underpricing stuff. It's kind of a bummer that things are heading that way. But the other route would be you keep and this is going to be different person to person, but for me, it might be like, okay, if I was to self-publish a thing and do all this, is like, just keep pushing on it until you're going to, it somehow crests some hill of like one of the major platform holders really wanting to push for it and give you that visibility. Because like just kind of like going out there without a plan, or like without some bigger firm to like really get eyes on it, even if it's just you working with like a PR company, right? I don't think that is necessarily enough to guarantee like people are going to see this thing.
Sure.
Just because there's so many games coming out. It's like so many, where if you can be like, oh, Sony or Microsoft or someone has like enough of a backing in this to like make sure it gets, like, the console seems like an easier place to get noticed. Not to say there's plenty of successful games that come out on Steam, but I don't know. It's really hard if you're banking stuff on it.
Yeah.
Where like if you looked at Cuphead, like, it's only on Xbox, but Xbox was behind it, right?
Right.
And they kept working on that thing after like what they initially planned to do to match people's expectations and probably get Xbox even more behind it. I don't know the details of anything of how that worked, but like a lot of stuff that's, it's either that seems like it helps make a bit less of a gamble. And I don't have advice on how to get that to happen, but like it would, just getting a partner like that seems smart, depending on it's also, it's weird to give advice to people because I contract on the side still. And I've been in the industry for, somehow now, like, relative to how long people stay in the industry, it seems like, oh, I've been in the industry forever, right? Like,
yeah, right.
I've worked on Tony Hawk games that were on PS2, like it's, so I am at a level of like, have enough contacts and have enough experience and background that I can support myself on very minimal amount of contract work. And there's a hard disconnect there of me going like, when I look at like stuff I'm excited for on INVERSUS sales, I'm like, oh, awesome, it's bringing in money. And then I like, if I back compute that to like, if I was to, charge Facebook or someone, I don't currently work for contract for Facebook, but if I was to be like, oh, I'm going to charge you for some engineering time,
right,
as like a, close to, a very high skilled engineer in the industry, I could make that money probably a lot quicker. Right. But it's like what you're doing with your time. I specifically choose to not do that because I want to, create these little pieces of art and stuff. And it's, I don't know, everyone's position is so different that is really hard to give advice unless you find someone in a very similar spot to where you are, which I have
Sure.
done maybe once or twice of like, oh, here's another person that's they're doing okay. They're not making big games, but the games aren't, it's not like if INVERSUS tanked completely, I'd be fine.
Right.
It's not like that for everyone, right? Some
No.
people coming in right out of college and they're like, I'm going to try to make this thing and I'm spending all my money or I'm putting a mortgage out or something.
Putting
Or
everything on the
even
line.
the
Yeah.
Cuphead guys supposedly did like take mortgages out and put all this
Right.
crazy stuff where like for me, I'm guess I'm more risk averse than that. And it would be a bummer if it made no money, but like if it did, I'm honestly, I'm going to
Icing on
be
the cake, so to
fine,
speak. Yeah.
right? Like,
I think that's really good to talk about though, because it's nice to see that not every indie dev story comes from the same place. Like, I mean, a lot of people, especially like, coming from press, you always hear about the stories of like the people that put everything on the line. The Cuphead stories. I can't remember what studio it is now, but the people that like hid out in a college conference room for like 3 years so they didn't have to pay rent to build this game. But that's not the only way to do it. And
no.
I really appreciate you saying that, oh, every situation's different. Here's mine. And I like that we've had an opportunity to kind of, take a snapshot of that and show that there is different ways of doing the whole indie dev thing. So Ryan, thank you for, telling us a little bit about how INVERSUS has grown and the, giving us a chance to explore this story about what went right and what went wrong. There'll be links to INVERSUS if this conversation has interested you in playing it. You can find links to buy that down below. And I hope that you'll keep us in the loop for further updates and future creations.
I will be working on the next thing today after this. So
Interesting.